What's up, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Lawyer You Know podcast. And, there are certain episodes I get excited about, and this is one of them. This is an interview with Brian Freedman, who is Justin Baldoni's lawyer, post-hearing. So after the judge ordered the lawyers to abide by Rule 3.6, after they discussed protective orders, and a lot of people were saying, is Baldoni's lawyer now going to have to shut up? Is the judge, is Blake Lively's team going to shut him up in the media? Well, he has a lot to say. And people sent me this interview. I thought it was going to be a 30-second clip. It's not. It's a pretty in-depth discussion about what's the point of this. Is this just all for PR, or are there real legal reasons here? Is this case likely to go to trial? What do you think? And will Taylor Swift be deposed? Good questions, really great answers. I can't wait to dig into this with you guys and answer all your questions and give my reaction to what's said during this interview on today's podcast. So let's jump into it. So this is from, I believe, a new podcast setup with the lawyer guy from TMZ and Mark Garagos. So two lawyers, one who runs TMZ, I guess. I don't know his exact position there, if he owns it, if he runs it, whatever it is. And Mark Garagos, who's a lawyer to the stars. So two lawyers involved. It's called Two Angry Men, high profile guys who can get special guests on there like Brian Freedman, even after the hearing, where Brian Freedman gave about a 2-second presser after the hearing on the courthouse steps. It's federal court, so no cameras in the courtroom. But then we were trying to think, is that how it's going to be now? Is it going to be quick? Is it going to be short and sweet? Will he come out and speak? What will he say? Will he be more careful about what he says? Will he still talk about the case? Will he still zealously defend Justin Baldoni in the court of public opinion? All right, so the first half of this episode, and I think it is, like I said, a new podcast. It's Harvey Levin, who I'm not exactly sure his position at TMZ. I think he's the founder or owner or something like that, but he is a lawyer. Mark Garagos is a lawyer. And first 15 minutes of this episode is Harvey from TMZ and Mark Garagos basically talking about the case and what they think about the case. And they both feel pretty confident that this is more of a, not stunt, but PR move, that Blake Lively started it to try to fix some bad PR. And then Baldoni has responded and filed all these lawsuits against the New York Times, against Lively, Reynolds, mentioning Taylor Swift, whatever it may be, all done for basically a PR fight, a publicity fight, a fight in the court of public opinion, so much more than a legal battle, and that there is a 0% chance this case goes to trial and that it will settle. Now, what they discussed is they think it's going to settle for maybe no money exchanging hands, maybe an apology, maybe something like that, but they asked Brian Freedman about it. I mentioned how maybe it would settle and it's this, redemption story, and they come back and do the movie together. Maybe I was completely off base and wrong about that. I'll tell you how I got there. But when we listen to Brian Freedman, I think he brings up an absolutely amazing point that maybe we haven't talked about enough on this channel. We do talk about it a lot, and we have mentioned it, but we're going to dig into it even more today about why maybe Baldoni just shouldn't do that because of principle and right and wrong. And we'll hear what Brian Freedman has to say about that. They also talk about how Freedman is basically king. He's a king for how he has built this narrative, fought against a huge tsunami of power and money and wealth and influence, how he wasn't scared, and how he has completely flipped it on its head and now turned it into where it seems like the majority of the public is behind Justin Baldoni. Also, disclaimer, Mark Garagos said he and Brian Freedman are very close friends and they work on these types of cases a lot together. So we have to remember that as they talk, as they ask these questions, that maybe there's a little even confirmed bias that Garagos is like, I trust Brian Freedman. I like Brian Freedman. I know Brian Freedman. So he's obviously not going to think he's lying, scumbag, slick, trying to sneak something in. So that comes with it too. And I think sometimes that's good for conversations, to have people that do have a personal relationship, that do know and understand each other. Obviously, maybe there'll be softball questions. Maybe there'll be questions he wouldn't ask if they were in such a different relationship than they are in. Some of you probably feel like I'm speed talking, but this is just how it goes when I get excited. And this was a really good interview. This was a really interesting interview. So without further ado, let's get to it.
Now we have Justin Baldoni's attorney on, Brian Freedman. Brian, welcome.
How are you, Harvey?
I'm good. So can I throw this out, because I have a feeling you are going to be angry, but I'm just going to, in full disclosure, tell you what I said, and I believe what Mark said. I don't think this case is ever going to trial. I think you've kind of won the PR battle, and I feel like this case was filed for PR reasons more than legal reasons. And you won it. Nobody wants to sit for Depose. Nobody wants to go on the stand. I don't see this case ever going to trial.
So before he answers, I do want to say that's the question so many people have. And he asked it straight up. Question number one. I love that. Question number, say whatever you want about TMZ, about Harvey. Everybody's got their own preconceived notions and what they know and like and don't like and how the business works, whatever. I'm just going to call it like I see it. That's a good question. I'm glad he started there. That's what so many of us want to do. And frankly, that's what a lot of us think this was from the jump. That's what so many people think this was in the public. But what I also want to put is the distinction. This case is never going to trial. So that part of the question, like 95 plus cases never go to trial. So that's not some great revelation if you don't think this case is going to go to trial. Now, of course, we know most lawyers pound their chest and say, I'm taking you to trial. We're going to trial. I do it myself. And frankly, that's how I start every case. And I build every case up like I am going to prepare this case as if it's going to trial, because you want to prepare for that. Because if you're not prepared and you have to try to play catch up, that makes it a lot more difficult. So the fact that it's not going to trial is not that big of a question. But then he mentioned some other details. Nobody wants to get deposed on this case. Nobody wants to take the stand on this case, take the stand at trial, but get deposed is a very different part. That happens usually in the first 90 days of a case being filed. Now, cases like this, maybe we'll say the first 6 months, where depositions of the key parties start happening. So if nobody wants that to happen, this case is going to settle much quicker than your average case. Of course, they can push all that out and delay it, but usually you can force it and file a motion with the court like, hey, judge, motion to compel the deposition of the plaintiff, of the defendant, of the party in this case. You have a right to depose them in these cases. So if they're really dodging, you can file those motions to put the pressure on. Harvey doesn't even think that's going to happen. So that's the really key and great question here for Freedman. But Garagos is going to jump in first and clarify what he said, because he and Harvey are their own individual people and they don't speak for each other, basically.
And to be fair, what I said is, if I'm representing Blake Lively, I am going to do virtually anything to not let Brian Freedman depose my client.
You know what? I'm not really sure.
So before we get to Freedman's answer, that's Garagos potentially helping his buddy out a little bit. Like, Taylor Swift and team, you're right to try and block Brian Freedman from deposing you, because he's a shark. And he's going to get you, and he's a pro, and you do not want to sit for deposition with Brian Freedman, pumping him up. I mean, he's crushed this case. He's done a great job in this case, and they're going to sing his praises and basically say he's a king at this. And there's one thing that sticks out to me more than anything else that they say about him a little bit later in the interview.
Whether it's going to go to trial or not go to trial, but I just know one thing, like Justin is a great guy. I wish this was more about him and less about negativity, frankly.
Don't you feel like you've won this PR war now?
It's not even about winning a PR war. Honestly, it's about saving someone.
It's funny. I noticed Garagos, Harvey, and myself all kind of had a reaction to that answer. It's like, it's not about the PR war, but it is. It's kind of like people say, it's not about the money. It's like, but it's about the money. And it is about the PR war. That was really important. And it wasn't for nothing, right? Potentially saved this guy's life and career by winning and fighting this PR battle for him, because if you didn't, he gets smushed pretty easily. So it is really important, but I get what he's saying, and he's the lawyer on the case, and we have to remember how boisterous he was early on in some of those interviews versus how cool, calm, and collected he is here, which shows he's a good lawyer that has the right persona and demeanor at the right time. And if a judge was going to look and compare the interviews, they could be like, okay, he is abiding the rules. He's making sure he's being careful, versus in the beginning, maybe he was being a little louder, a little quicker with what he was going to say and more purposeful in his comments, really attacking certain things and people and allegations. And I respect him for that. And I think it's an A+ move. And you're going to notice it as we listen to the whole interview. He doesn't shy away. He doesn't back down, but it feels a little different to me.
One's life. I mean, imagine, Harvey, you being accused of something that you just didn't do. You just weren't part of, and you're caught up in this, and you're a real decent human being, and this is a powerful thing that you're going through, and your whole career seems to have been gone and vanished before your very eyes.
I'm confused.
So before we get to why Harvey's confused, that was the point early on that I said, maybe we haven't talked enough about this. It is really important. It's easy for us to get into the legal documents and the legal arguments, but the principle behind all of this and the real point that I think, we have to make sure doesn't get lost is, if you're a person, and from my perspective, it's easy for me because I handle a lot of these cases and I talk to clients about, you lost a leg or you lost a loved one, it's like we're never going to be able to bring them back. It's miserable. It's horrible. But you have to realize where we are in the civil justice system. And when they offer you a lot of money, you have to consider it or else it can come back to bite you later in the process. So it becomes about money. The discussion becomes about money at some point in these cases. But to have a case like this that's quasi-criminal and these allegations of the type of harassment that Blake Lively has thrown Justin Baldoni's way, if you didn't do it and you believe with 100% certainty these are provably false allegations and you want to stand up to them and you want to fight it with the full force and effect of the law and the best lawyers you can possibly get, that's your right. And frankly, you should do it. You should do it not just for yourself, but everybody else in the world that's ever been falsely accused of something so horrible. There are great, decent young men and women who get accused of these types of actions way too often. And the punishment and repercussion, if those allegations are false, is sometimes non-existent and very rarely as harsh as they should be. Now, I don't know where the facts are going to lie in this case. I think there's so much going on in the background that we don't know yet. But from what we've seen, he has a pretty good argument that these were at least exaggerated, if not completely false allegations coming from Blake Lively. Now, if she has more evidence, if the depositions take place and they say, no, he did do this, he did do that, it was absolutely creepy until they had that meeting and they went through all of those things that he had to do before they would start back up, well, then fine. And we're always going to be open-minded to seeing and reviewing more facts that can affect where we land on a case. But if you believe these types of heinous false accusations come your way, you have every right and you should fight them, no matter what somebody like me says about, oh, it would be a great redemption story, because a lot of times, call me cynical, but you follow the money. And if they feel like they can both rebound and the most money can come from the sequel blowing up as a redemption story after all this litigation, and look at how great they were and they're both the bigger person, I can see a world where that happens. Or like they talk about here, a world where they're all like, okay, that was fun. It was a PR battle, but we're done now. We're done now. Let's all walk away and we're done. We don't want to actually have to tell the truth under oath in court and have all of our dirty laundry aired out. And you can call everybody cynical that says that's how they think it's going to end. But if you've been through litigation and you know how difficult it is and you know how much they can pry into people's lives, that has to be the most likely result, is some kind of settlement and maybe not a full 100% winner and 100% loser.
Confused about that. I know
To have been gone and vanished before your very eyes.
I'm confused about that. I know William Morris dropped Justin, but at the same time, more people know who this guy is than they did before this. And just in terms of, the street Nielsen's that I see, just in terms of, what comes at us here at TMZ, that Blake was winning at the beginning and it turned around and she's not now. So isn't it mission accomplished? Because, I know you're suing for huge numbers, but especially your lawsuit against Blake. I feel like her lawsuit was a PR to try and salvage PR, and his was a reaction to that. And hasn't that all kind of been settled at this point?
So basically, he's so big and famous now, Baldoni, he kind of looks better than he ever did before. So what are your damages? It's a really good question, once again. And a good lawyer might be stumped by that, because it's like we saw Relly trying to deal with this. It's like in the ASAP Rocky trial, it's like you didn't really have a career before. If you win this, now you'll have a career. Now you'll have money, something you never had before. So how would you actually get hurt by any of this publicity? It's a little different in that case, but similarly here, I kind of agree. I didn't even know who Baldoni was. I didn't see the movie. I never heard of him before. Now I know him. And I'm sure there's a lot of people like that. So how does he have damages? And a good lawyer has to be prepared and ready to answer this question. Telehealth has made mental health care more convenient and accessible for millions of people. However, critical challenges like finding a suitable therapist, scheduling appointments, and the expensive out-of-pocket costs still keep many from getting the care they need. Well, our sponsor on today's video is Rula, and they're on a mission to make high-quality mental health care from a licensed professional easy and affordable for everyone. Rula takes most major insurance plans, and the average copay is only $15 a session. Rula starts by asking you a few questions about what's important to you, and then provides you with a list of licensed in-network providers who match your preferences. You can schedule your preferred time and meet with your therapist as soon as the next day. Thousands have already trusted Rula to support them on their journey toward improved mental health and overall well-being. Head on over to Rula.com/LYK to get started today. After you sign up, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Go to RULA.com/LYK and take the first step toward better mental health today. You deserve quality care from someone who cares.
I think what hasn't been settled is the fact that they've lost 4 projects, significant projects, the studio. There's obviously the reputational and emotional distress harm. He's got 2 little kids that pay attention to what goes on in the world. His wife is devastated, and there's others involved in this too that have lost significant business and personal relationships.
I've said it a million.
That's a great answer. They've lost 4 projects, which is how you know they actually have cognizable damages that they can show. Then the emotional turmoil it's taken on him. And he's not alone. There are other people whose careers and pocketbooks have been affected by this. And lastly, the reputational harm. Guess what? You or I or anybody watching this or anybody with a YouTube channel or anybody talking to their friends can be like, oh, Baldoni, I'm team Baldoni. He's going to win. It's so bad what happened to him. I feel so bad for him. That's all fine. But that doesn't mean there's not people in Hollywood, people making decisions on projects thinking, I think he's a good actor. I think he might be right for this, but do we really want that? Do we really want those harassment claims? What if something happens on set and now we're on notice because we already know somebody's claimed this about him before? Do we really want to take that fight with WME or Ryan Reynolds or Blake Lively? Do we want that battle? Is it worth it to hire him for this? It is absolutely, I don't really care if he wins in the court of public opinion. The same thing is probably still happening to Johnny Depp, if I'm being honest. And by the way, Depp and Baldoni, you can't really compare with where their careers were when lawsuits started coming like this. But there's got to be people still in the back of their minds thinking, do we really want that baggage? And that's the biggest, that's such the huge problem with these false allegations, if that's what this ends up being. And we've had cases where, not guilty defendants were falsely accused. That stuff still follows you. It doesn't just go away because you won some publicity battle.
Significant, business and personal relationships.
I've said it a million times that you raised the Titanic in this case because, but for Brian Freedman, Justin Baldoni would have been crushed in this matter. And that's where it was headed. And it was headed for him to be crushed. When you see the kinds of things that were left on the cutting room floor, literally, in that New York Times article, it's infuriating.
But that's against the New York.
So he just said something, and I think he might dig into it a little bit more later, but Garagos makes a really good point. He said Freedman raised the Titanic. And there's got to be another point because there's something sticking in my head like other lawyers would not have done this. Other lawyers would have folded. I think he's got to say it later because I can remember it in my mind's eye. And that's true. A lot of lawyers would be way too scared to take this case. They would assume you're going to lose. When you hear it's Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, Taylor Swift that you're potentially going against, if they're connected, if there is, that battle of Khaleesi and her dragons coming your way, a lot of lawyers would have folded. A lot of lawyers wouldn't have wanted. It could affect them and their business, especially if you work in this type of celebrity business. And that's true. And we have to remember that. It's all easy to say, oh, wow, look at how Ben Chu and Camille Vasquez. Yeah, it was so easy for them to go and represent Johnny Depp. It's like, not really. Some people thought Johnny Depp was a horrible person. And by association, probably thought his lawyers were horrible people. And they went and they won, and they're kings and queens of the industry now. But it doesn't always go that way. And it is a risk at the beginning of the case. A lot of these cases, there's no perfect case. There's no easy case most of the time. Certain prosecutors, I think, have easy cases. But there's no easy case most of the time when it comes to this, especially when there's a lot of money and a lot of celebrity rolling around in it. So we have to understand that Brian Freedman taking this case and what he's done with it, both sides, right? These lawyers that take these cases and they really push for truth and transparency, and it ends up becoming a situation where the public starts to see it their way. That's good work. Now, we don't know how it's going to end, and we don't know if there's still more to come from either side, but he's done good work on this case to go up against a very huge and powerful machine. And we have to understand that.
Literally, in that New York Times article, it's infuriating.
But that's against the New York Times. And I get that, and that is kind of separate. I guess what I'm wondering is if because Blake Lively, the last thing she wants is to take the stand. She doesn't want her husband to take the stand. She doesn't want Taylor Swift to take the stand, nor do they want to take the stand. So if they came to you and just said, we will basically call this a massive misunderstanding, can we just drop it? Would you entertain it? I'm curious.
And that's kind of what I said last video. Is like, I don't know if they call it a misunderstanding or if there was some kind of half-hearted apology or we worked it out in the background. We want to keep this private. Please respect our privacy. You know, if they came out with something like that, would they be able to put all this behind them? And I kind of think that's how I thought it was going to end. And I like Brian Freedman's answer a lot more.
I mean, he was called a sexual predator. So are they saying he's still a sexual predator, but it's a misunderstanding?
You know, Harvey,
That's the answer. There are certain things you can't just get over. So in order for us, here's what it sounded like to me. I'll translate what Brian Freedman's statement sounded like to me. If they say it was a misunderstanding, you know, no big deal, we're going to get over it, but Justin Baldoni is absolutely not a predator, he absolutely did not harass anyone, then maybe. But it sounds like they're going to want some public comment or some understanding that, you know, whatever you want to say about the set or the movie or the actions or whatever, if he said some things he shouldn't or he was insensitive or whatever, but he was not a predator. And that needs to be clear. And I hope and pray that that is true and they stand on business when it comes to that. I'm cynical because so many times it doesn't happen. We saw Deshaun Watson and those civil cases and how they went, how it sounded like. I think we're going to see it in the P. Diddy Jay-Z case. I think that can go quiet pretty quick with the right amount of money. We'll see. We'll see if that public justice does come to give other people that are wrongfully accused more confidence to stand up, regardless of what some people say and how bad it may look in the beginning. And I'm talking generally, right? Not specifically about this case. I don't know the facts of this case. Freedman knows the facts of this case. He stands on the principle of what he believes to be true from what he knows. I'm just saying, generally speaking, when this happens to people, it is very hard to stand up and be resolute on what you believe to be the truth.
Harvey, when you're in the middle of representing one of these people who's in the eye of a storm, and Brian's done it a zillion times, I've done it a fair amount of times, you need to be vindicated. Because at the end of the day, you're not, no amount of money will get you back to square zero. To your point, Harvey, as many people didn't know Baldoni as they knew Lively. However, Lively, be careful what you wish for, has, the public has gone full Amber Heard on her. And Baldoni could have been defined, as Brian just said, as the sexual predator, but for the magnificent job he's done here. So,
he's puffing his buddy up, right? But what do you expect? And he has done a magnificent job. So friends or not, right? But that's what I was talking about. But he mentioned it off the top. I didn't play the beginning of the interview, but he mentioned they're very close friends. They've worked together a lot. So it's not like he's trying to hide any of that.
It's a horrible body blow to have to take and have, can't leave your house. I don't know, and I haven't asked you this, Brian, but I'm going to assume he's got round-the-clock security and his family's had to be relocated and the whole bit.
I mean, there's certainly that invasion of privacy that goes on, but I think it's not so much having something to do with me that turned the tide. I mean, the reason to put the information
again, like that's the perfect answer. It's not about me. Be humble. Let your buddy talk about how good you are, not yourself. So I try to tell my kids, right? Don't talk about how great you are. Don't talk about all your accolades and accomplishments. If you do a good job, people will notice. I promise you do not have to worry about that. And his buddy's over there saying what a great job he did. And he's like, it's not about me. It's about getting the information out there publicly, which again, kudos.
Having something to do with me that turned the tide. I mean, the reason to put the information out there is just because of who he is. It's the truth. It's just the truth, and the reality is that had there been these horrible things, and had there been these horrible text messages, had there been this horrible information, that stuff would have been put out there too.
I appreciate your humility, but you and I both know, and I think Harvey would say the same, a lot of lawyers in your position would have just rolled over and played dead. That's unfortunate. They would not have fought back and just would have thought there's no way to stem this tide. It's a tsunami coming at me.
Yeah.
That's what it was. That's what I was remembering earlier. And he's right. He's right. It's sad, but it's right. We've seen it. We've seen it in criminal cases that just seem too difficult. And we've seen it when lawyers do stand up to something that feels like a tsunami, guilty or innocent, their client, right? And people hate them for it.
So Mark and I were talking about something before you jumped on. The whole thing is.
By the way, I do want to just mention, like, people that are for Baldoni are going to be all for this and clapping their hands. There are some other cases where they do the same thing. And then they hate on lawyers in other cases that do the same exact thing. But realize this is the job of a lawyer. If you take a case, if you believe in a case, if you represent your client, you should represent them to the fullest of your ability, as zealously as you can, while still remaining ethical, of course. But it's what lawyers are supposed to do. People love it when they like their client. They hate it when they don't, or I should say like their case. They hate it when they don't. But let's realize this applies to all lawyers in scenarios where they are doing the best job they can.
So Mark and I were talking about something before you jumped on. The whole thing is curious, the way Ryan Reynolds got so involved in this, that there was that meeting at their penthouse where he confronted Justin and allegedly screamed at Justin. And we were talking about what brought all of this on. Was it that Blake was going home and expressing her dismay at things that were happening with him? Or was this, I mean, people are kind of talking about this online, kind of a love-hate kind of thing, where all of a sudden Ryan is just saying, just stop it, everybody. And, I'm not saying that happened, but people are talking that way. So I'm just wondering what you think the motivation was where this turned into nuclear war.
Well, as we have alleged in our complaint, that, this was a.
Just going to point out, as we alleged in our complaint, he has been very careful. They've talked in generalities about handling cases like this, about what a great guy Baldoni is. That's what he wants to talk about, right? He started from the jump. Let's talk about what a great guy Baldoni is. This is how it's affected him mentally, emotionally. This is how he's been accused of something wrongfully. It's all about Baldoni, right? Turning the tide. It wasn't about me. It was about Baldoni. It was about the text message we made everything public. And then when he's about to answer a question about some specifics about the case, what does he say? As I alleged in the complaint. And we have to remember, this is post-hearing, post the judge, whatever the judge said to them, and implemented Rule 3.6 by stipulation because all the parties agreed, had some kind of talking to with them, right? And so it's almost like an opening statement when you can't argue. It's like objection argumentative. The evidence will show, Your Honor, that this guy's a liar. It's like, well, that's still argumentative, but just because you said the evidence will show, that like covers things up. And so as alleged in the complaint or as is in the public record, things like that are protections within that rule. Are you feeling buried under credit card bills, personal loans, or medical debt? It's like your money's working harder for your lenders than it is for you. But it doesn't have to be that way with PDS Debt. Today's sponsor is PDS Debt, and they do more than just help you manage your debt. They empower you to take control. Using their platform, they go beyond the numbers to understand your unique financial situation and craft a personalized plan designed for you. No more cookie cutter solutions, just a clear path to financial freedom that fits your lifestyle. And here's the best part. There's no minimum credit score required. Whether your credit is bad or fair, they're here to help you save more, pay off your debt faster, and start putting money back where it belongs, into your savings account. Getting started is easy. Go to pdsdebt.com/LYK to complete your free debt assessment to see what options are available to you. Every day you wait, it's costing you money. Get started with your free debt analysis in just 30 seconds at pdsdebt.com/LYK. That's pdsdebt.com/LYK. So you can take back control today by visiting pdsdebt.com/LYK.
Well, as we have alleged in our complaint, that this was a takeover of a movie, and whether we find out exactly what the reasons for the takeover were and who was behind the takeover, I think that we're going to find some interesting documents when discovery starts, and I'm looking forward to discovery, because when you start to look into what was in Stephanie Jones's hands and what was in Leslie Sloan's hands and what was in Blake Lively's text messages, and what those discussions were like. I think we're going to find the answers to this really quickly.
And I'll tell you what that was. We call that a very, very nice legal threat. He's looking forward to discovery because he thinks when he finds out what was in all these people's hands and in Blake Lively's text messages, we're going to know exactly why this movie takeover happened. So, by the way, that's more than what was alleged in the complaint. But he started out with, we alleged in our complaint, right? So kind of covering his answer here in that. But to me, that's also a bit of a point where if I'm Blake Lively or her lawyers, I'm like, I don't want to give him all my text messages. I don't want to give him all this discovery. It's not just about a deposition, which they're going to talk about in a second, but discovery is also something you do not want to get out there because all you need is for him to file it in some motion and then it becomes part of the public record and then he can post it on the website and then everybody's starting to see everything. So this is all a big leverage play. I think Harvey and Garagos in the beginning had it right. What we've talked about is so much of this has to do with the PR leverage, but from Baldoni's perspective, it can be leveraging that PR, leveraging the publicity. And what they're going to say is the transparency and the truth in order to force Blake Lively to settle this case and give them maybe the public apology of some sort that they want and need. And they're going to use these leverage points and these points of pressure that they can push to get there.
Are going to depose Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, Taylor Swift. Who else?
Well,
I'm backing it up just so we can hear the full question from Harvey because he kind of slips this one in there.
I think we're going to find the answers to this really quickly.
You are going to depose Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, Taylor Swift. Who else?
Well, I don't know that we're going to depose Taylor Swift or not.
So that's interesting because it seems obvious if this case goes, you're going to depose Taylor Swift. If she was there, if she was pushing for Blake Lively's scene, if she was pushing for Blake Lively's takeover, if she was being used as leverage, did she know it? Did she agree to it? Did you know what was happening? Did you talk to anybody on Baldoni's team? Were you trying to push something? Did Blake tell you she wanted to take over this movie? Did Blake tell you she had these negative feelings about Baldoni? Did Blake complain about the harassment from Baldoni to you? All very relevant, important questions Taylor Swift could answer. And if she said, I don't know, we didn't talk about that, I had no idea what was happening, she just asked me to help her on a project, well, then that's good for Blake Lively's team. But regardless, it is relevant to this case. So why would he say he doesn't know that he's, and that's the only one he mentioned, right? Obviously, Lively and Reynolds, he's going to depose. But he's like, I don't know that we're going to depose Taylor Swift. That's interesting to me. And you would think if he just said yes to that, we're going to depose Lively, Reynolds, and Swift, that's more leverage. That's more pressure. That's something nobody on that side is going to want. I'll tell you right now, in an average Joe case that I have where John Smith is the client, he doesn't want his friends to be deposed. He doesn't want his wife to be deposed. He doesn't want his mom to be deposed or his kids to be deposed. He doesn't want to drag anybody else into his lawsuit. So imagine to the nth degree what that feels like when your friend is Taylor Swift. And her getting either publicly embarrassed or some of her text messages ordered in discovery. I mean, that is just so much worse feeling, at least, if you're the friend of Taylor Swift and the reason this all may happen to her. And that's a really important part of this case. And I was kind of surprised that he said, we don't know that we're going to depose Taylor Swift. He finishes the answer as well.
Really?
I think that that's going to be, probably a game time decision. I don't know that decision's been made, but I can tell you this: there's anyone that reasonably has information that can be that can provide evidence in this case is going to be deposed.
That's Taylor Swift. She was there.
He's right.
For that meeting.
She was there for that meeting.
Okay, well,
not only was she there for the meeting, but like I said, she could have a lot of context in this case. And I would think, I'm just telling you, as a lawyer who handles civil cases, discovery's broad. You take the deposition of anybody that could have some relevant information, not just people that were present at a very big meeting that's mentioned in the complaint, but there's so much more context she could potentially add to this case, which is important. And both lawyers, Harvey and Mark, are both kind of laughing like, I think you're going to depose Taylor Swift. He's like, I don't know. They're both like, well, I think you're going to depose Taylor Swift.
I'm a lawyer. I know what that means. and that's why I'm just thinking that even when you you take Blake and Ryan out of it in terms of how they personally feel about it all. I mean, to say that we're going to put Taylor Swift in the middle of this whole thing, I think they are going to do everything they can to avoid going to court, because the last thing they want is to have their friend, the biggest star in the world now, sitting on a stand being grilled by Brian Freedman.
My assumption is that they're going to probably take some legal actions that are beyond the bounds of decency, and we'll see if they can try to avoid a deposition.
So I don't know what he means necessarily by beyond the bounds of decency, but for sure they're going to file protective orders. For sure they're going to say this is just harassing to depose Taylor Swift. He's got no reason. She's unavailable. She's too busy doing X, Y, and Z. She's the biggest star in the world. So there's definitely things and motions that you can do and motions that you can file to try and block this stuff. And if it's unnecessary or harassing or overly broad or isn't reasonably leading to discoverable material, you can make all those objections. You can file those notices, but I mean, if she's a witness, if she's there, if she talked about it, if she's part of the pressure to take over the movie, I don't see how she's not a relevant witness that should be deposed. Now, doesn't mean the court's going to agree. And maybe the court will put some parameters, like it's all sealed. There's going to be a magistrate there. Swift's going to have a lawyer there, whatever. But, I mean, he's ready. He knows this is not over. This is the very beginning. And the fact that he's maybe winning in the court of public opinion is going to make everybody take this very seriously and put all of the money and resources and time and power they have behind their position.
How could they do that if there's relevance?
I'm going to object and order the witness not to testify.
So Garagos is like, chill. Let's not give away what we think they're going to do and what they think we're going to do. Let's just everybody take a timeout here real quick, Harvey. I'm not going to let him answer that question, which I think is absolutely hilarious.
If there's relevance.
I'm going to object and order the witness not to testify.
You're not his lawyer. You're his friend. Jeez.
Mark is usually my lawyer, though.
I'm working here, guys. I mean, come on.
I know you're working.
Harvey's right, and he's right, and that's a great question. And I wish we could get Freedman's answer, but this was a cool conversation. I'll just say, I'm geeking out a little bit because this is a cool conversation to me.
So am I. So there you go. So am I. Brian, I have a question, and you don't have to answer it if you think it skirts it. We were talking early on that when Judge Lyman came out yesterday on the record, so I'm not trying to influence anybody or get anybody sideways.
And do you notice how Garagos said that? I'm not trying to influence anybody or get anybody sideways. This is right after earlier in the episode, they both said, this is what lawyers do. Of course, we're trying to poison the jury pool. Of course, we're trying to bring people to our side. You're not supposed to, but you want to be likable. You want the jury to see it your way. That's what we do through a trial. We pull a jury towards our side. We want them to vote our way, which call it bias, call it whatever. They end up on our side, right? That's what we want to do. Well, they're saying that's exactly what we do. So they start out with that. And then Garagos, before he asks this question, he prefaces it, which again is how you know this is a good friend. This is somebody that wants to help Freedman and not get Freedman in any trouble, obviously, with what his questions are. So he ends up saying, hey, just to start out, I'm not trying to influence anybody. And this is something that the judge said or is already in the public or whatever he says is very funny to me.
He had mentioned that he was not inclined to order compliance with the New York rule. But that because stipulation of the parties, he had reconsidered. Do you want to describe what that means? Because we took a flyer and I want to make sure we got it right.
Look, I think that every lawyer intends to follow the professional rules of conduct, and that's there's been every intention to do that in this case, and we believe we've followed the professional rules of conduct. And
so, like we said, no surprise. Nothing additional. We as lawyers already fit into that. We've talked about this ad nauseum, and he just confirmed it. They don't believe they violated it, but this judge's ruling doesn't really change much because we already all want to abide by those rules. Now, except for certain kinds of sanctions if you violate a court order. That's the only additional thing, which we broke it down at length in our video we did last week.
And the professional rule of conduct at issue, talks about an exception. And that exception is when your client is prejudiced by, public information.
And that was even our guess as well. I'm going to back it up just because I kept interrupting it, but we knew that they were going to firmly sit in and argue that I don't know if you want to call it an exception, but the thing you're allowed to talk about is when your client has been publicly prejudiced by somebody else, those comments have been publicly prejudiced, you can come out and defend him. And that's exactly what he did. And he confirms what we thought all along, that that's exactly what he believes he was doing, which is well within the rules.
The professional rule of conduct at issue, talks about an exception. And that exception is when your client is prejudiced by, public information that's not generated by you, but in fact generated by a third party or the other party. And all we're trying to do is have a fair process. That's all.
I got to tell you, I have covered so many cases. O.J. Simpson case was my life for a long, long time. And Rodney King was my life. And every day, both sides tried to prejudice the jury pool. And ultimately, it didn't matter. And that's what lawyers do anyway. They're not there to say, I'm just going to be a straight shooter. They're advocates. The idea that you can taint a jury by holding a news conference and talking about a text, to me, is so ridiculous. And you look at O.J. Simpson, and, I reported every day there was blood going from the bodies to his bathroom, and he was acquitted. So the idea that a jury is somehow going to remember what Brian Freedman or the other side said, a year before a trial, to me is just, I think the rule is stupid.
Yeah, he's wrong. That's where I'll totally disagree with Harvey. I don't think the rule is stupid. I disagree because I've sat in jury selection where, in a high profile case where jurors remembered exactly that, a news article from a newspaper that's much smaller than TMZ. But they read it and they believe it and they think about it, especially if something's inadmissible or wrong. So it does happen. Does it happen to the majority of jurors? No. I don't think it's a stupid rule. And I think it's very different for Harvey from TMZ to report on something, right? Like a blood going from one place to the next, and a lawyer to say it. So I do think that that's why the rule is distinguished. And call me a stickler because I'm on these rules committees and we think through things and how to protect as much as we can. I don't disagree that when a lawyer goes out and they speak publicly about a case, when they do jury selection, when they do opening statement, closing argument, whenever they talk about their case ever, they are shading towards making it look as good or be the best result from their client as they possibly can. That's what lawyers do. But there are parameters that you have to do that within. I do think they're important. And I think if it was the Wild Wild West and everybody had the same rules as TMZ, we'd be getting in a lot of trouble. So I do think we have to be careful about how far we take this. And I think the rule is set up perfectly as it is. You can respond. When somebody else does something publicly to prejudice your client, you can then respond. If they don't go out on the offensive. And we really don't want prosecutors going out there. I mean, if what Harvey's saying is in place, then prosecutors can be like, this guy's guilty from day one. And most people would always believe that. The cops can come out and be like, we found this guy. We all got in there and he was screaming all sorts of stuff. And it might not even be true, but it doesn't matter. We've seen how cops can get in their mind, this person's guilty and they did it. And the rules become gray and fuzzy then once they believe they've got the guy or the gal that did it, because they think that's more important than anything else. And so we have to be really careful about how we want to just throw these rules away, as opposed to, I think it's fair game. Freedman has absolutely come out and fought for his client and done things to make people look at his client better. You can call that poisoning the jury pool or influencing the public all you want, but he did it within the rules, in my opinion, because his client was prejudiced by negative publicity by a third party or the other party. So I think it fits well within the rules, and the rules are doing their job when it comes to this.
Both of you guys represent a lot of famous people, and that trials are kind of two-pronged. One, you want to win the case that's before you, but then you want to make sure that the person's life is okay once the trial is over, and that...
Yeah, but that's impossible. That's impossible. You cannot extinguish completely or erase the negatives that come with being even falsely accused if you go win at trial, criminal case or a civil case like this.
They still have a career, and, they can make money, they can support their family. And that element is what lawyers do outside the courtroom. And so I always thought when judges say, no, muzzle yourself, they're not allowing you to fully represent a client.
I don't think that's what the judge is saying at all, is muzzle yourself. I think the judge is really saying...
And so now we get Freedman's position on what the judge actually said at the hearing. And this was one of the things I was really waiting on. I mean, this interview had a ton of good nuggets in it. And so we're all trying to guess based on, Freedman's presser and what the order is and what everybody's reporting that was in the courtroom. And it's hard, but now we get it from the horse's mouth. What was his take from the hearing on, did the judge muzzle you? Did she shut you up? Did Lively's team win? There's not an official gag order, but did the judge gag you?
Muzzle yourself. They're not allowing you to fully represent a client.
I don't think that's what the judge is saying at all, is muzzle yourself. I think the judge is really saying, act in accordance with, professional, the professional rules.
But what does that mean? What does that mean?
I think it means that if there's prejudice to your client as a result of something that you didn't cause, that was caused by someone else or something else, that you are allowed to put forth evidence to make sure that that prejudice is remedied.
So
bangarang, as they say, right? That's it. And you stick to it and you never admit that you went outside it and you go argue and fight and you make sure in your mind that you're within that. And then you go and you do it. And you do exactly what Harvey's saying, right? You fight for your client. You fight to make sure they're not prejudiced. You fight to make sure the truth is out there and it's not going to get twisted or messed up against your client. And then the lawyer can do their job fully within the rules.
To put forth evidence to make sure that that prejudice is remedied.
So how does Justin feel now? Does he feel like there is kind of a move toward understanding and believing him more? Is he taking solace in that? Is he still, devastated? Is the entertainment industry backing away from him? Have they come back? What's going on in his world?
You definitely can't say everything's fine and the entertainment industry's coming back, or that crushes his damages argument.
I think he feels, really concerned about all of this and really sad about all of it for everybody that's involved. I think he goes through, emotions that everyone goes through in these types of situations. But, he's a really decent human being and a decent person, and has really been very fair and not wanting to attack anyone. But he is, he's devastated as anyone would be. He's, and the studio has lost hundreds of millions of dollars. And as we've put forth in the complaint, there are significant damages that he suffered, and the emotional distress, having represented a number of people who have been involved in these situations, the emotional distress that people go through, and how difficult it is to walk through an airport, to walk through, your daily life, to be with your children, to try to, be a normal father or husband, and any of it, with all of this weighing on you is just tremendously taxing. And he's going through it, like they all go through it. And, we're just, he's going to keep his head held high and tell the truth and be honest and be honorable. And we know that will serve him.
Brian, thank you. You are our first guest on our first Two Angry Men podcast. So thanks for jumping on.
Okay. Well, I hope I don't get sanctioned as a result of it. So.
Did you hear that? Okay, well, I hope I don't get sanctioned as a result of it. I'll back it up so you can hear it again. He's like, thanks for coming on, but it's on his mind, right? It's on Brian Freedman's mind. He is going to be careful. Whatever happened at that hearing, the judge didn't muzzle him, didn't gag him, didn't shut him up, but he is definitely cognizant and thinking about what he's saying in these interviews. And he's probably going to be careful about what shows and interviews he does now. He's probably very comfortable with these two guys. That's certainly how it seems. And especially Garagos is going to be there to protect him. So, but he said it, right? And we're all thinking it. Is he going to say something? Is he going to misstep? Because Lively's, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Lively's team is watching everything he does and waiting for him to trip up and say, see, judge, see, we told you he did this, and then get the gag order.
So thanks for jumping on.
Okay, well, I hope I don't get sanctioned as a result of it. So, but I'm sure you guys will indemnify me, so we'll be good.
What could go wrong? Thank you, Brian.
All right, take care.
Okay, Mark, we'll talk next week.
Thank you.
And that's it. How about it? Such an interesting interview. I really enjoyed listening to it myself. I enjoyed even more breaking it down in depth, continuing to pause it, give you my thoughts. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought of it. Were you surprised at anything Brian Freedman said? If you did, let me know in the comment section. Do you think this is any different from his other interviews, or do you think it's the same? Am I off in thinking that it's different? Because I listened to it and then thought about it, right? And the sanctions comment kind of made me think about that as well. And maybe as you were listening to it, you didn't feel the same way. So let me know if you didn't. Let me know if you enjoyed this one. Hit that like button if you guys have not already. That's all we got. So until next time, we are out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a pase you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.